Winning matches can earn you trophies. Winning a nation's heart can earn you something far greater. On the evening of July 13, 2026, the grand halls of Malacañang Palace weren't welcoming a visiting president, a world leader, or a decorated military hero. Instead, they opened their doors for a 20-year-old tennis player whose remarkable Wimbledon journey had captured the imagination of an entire nation. Standing before President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., First Lady Iga Swiatek Marcos, senior government officials, distinguished guests, and her proud parents, Alex Eala received one of the highest honors the Philippine government can bestow, a presidential citation. It was a moment that reached far beyond sports, because this wasn't simply a celebration of one unforgettable tournament. It wasn't only about defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek. It wasn't only about becoming the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the round of 16 at a Grand Slam. And it certainly wasn't only about climbing to a career-high world number 28. Those achievements earned worldwide admiration, but something much bigger earned her a place inside the presidential palace. That raises an important question. How did one extraordinary Wimbledon campaign become a moment of national history? The answer begins inside Malacañang Palace on one unforgettable Monday evening. As cameras flashed across the ceremonial hall, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. personally welcomed Alex Eala home. Beside him stood First Lady Iga Swiatek Marcos, while cabinet officials, government leaders, distinguished guests, and members of the Eala family gathered to witness a ceremony unlike anything Philippine tennis had experienced in decades. For Alex Eala's parents, it was more than a proud family milestone. Years of sacrifice, countless flights between continents, difficult decisions, and unwavering belief had led to this single evening. Their daughter had left home as a teenager, chasing an impossible dream. Now she had returned to the country's highest seat of government, not because someone promised her success, but because she had earned the respect of an entire nation. Then came the defining moment. President Marcos Jr. presented Alex Eala with the Presidential Citation, recognizing not only her historic Wimbledon performance, but also the pride and inspiration she had brought to millions of Filipinos around the world. The significance of that recognition cannot be overstated. Presidential citations are reserved for individuals whose achievements extend beyond personal success. They honor people whose accomplishments elevate the nation itself. By presenting this award, the Philippine government was sending a clear message that Alex Eala's impact reached far beyond the baseline of a tennis court. During the ceremony, President Marcos Jr. praised more than her victories. He spoke about her composure under pressure, her determination, and perhaps most importantly, the way she never hesitated to identify herself as proudly Filipino every time international cameras were pointed in her direction. After every major victory, she consistently acknowledged where she came from. She carried the Philippine flag with pride. She spoke about her country with confidence. And in doing so, she gave millions of Filipinos something deeply meaningful, a reason to see themselves represented on one of the biggest stages in world sports. That may explain why this ceremony felt different. History remembers champions, but nations remember people who inspire belief. Across the Philippines, television networks replayed the emotional scenes from Malacañang Palace throughout the evening. Newspapers described the event as a fitting tribute to a young athlete whose achievements had already begun reshaping the country's sporting identity. Social media filled with messages celebrating not only her success, but what that success represented for future generations. For many Filipinos, this was the first time they had seen a tennis player receive such extraordinary national recognition. It felt larger than one athlete, larger than one tournament, even larger than one sport. It felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Because for decades, Philippine sporting greatness had largely been defined by legends in boxing, weightlifting, and basketball. Tennis had rarely occupied that space in the national conversation. Alex Eala changed that. In just a matter of weeks, she transformed tennis from a niche sport into a source of national pride. Her Wimbledon breakthrough sparked conversations far beyond sports pages. Schools discussed her discipline. Families celebrated her perseverance. Young children suddenly imagined themselves holding tennis rackets instead of simply watching from afar. That is why the ceremony inside Malacañang Palace mattered so much. It wasn't celebrating a lucky tournament. It wasn't rewarding a single upset victory. It was recognizing a young woman who had quietly become a symbol of possibility. And to truly understand why the Philippine government believed Alex Eala deserved one of the nation's highest honors, we have to look beyond the palace walls and revisit the extraordinary journey that transformed a promising young Gaydus's ride tennis player into one of the country's newest national sporting icons. The answer begins with what happened on the grass courts of Wimbledon. Before July 2026, Alex Eala was already considered one of the brightest young talents in women's tennis. Coaches respected her work ethic. Analysts admired her potential. Tennis fans knew her name. But outside the sport, she was still largely unknown. That changed in a matter of days. Everything shifted when Alex Eala stepped onto center court against defending Wimbledon champion and world number 3 Iga Swiatek. Almost every prediction favored Swiatek. She had already established herself as one of the dominant players of her generation, while Alex Eala was viewed as a talented outsider with little chance of pulling off one of the tournament's biggest surprises. Then came the upset nobody saw coming. Playing with remarkable composure, fearless shot-making, and unwavering belief, Alex Eala defeated the defending champion in one of the defining moments of Wimbledon 2026. It wasn't simply another upset. It instantly became one of the biggest stories of the tournament. For tennis fans around the world, it was the arrival of a new star. For the Philippines, it felt like history unfolding in real time. That victory carried Alex Eala into the round of 16, making her the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles tournament. Think about that for a moment. The Philippines has produced world champions in several sports. Boxing has Manny Pacquiao. Weightlifting has Hidilyn Diaz. Billiards has Efren Reyes. But tennis had never experienced a breakthrough of this magnitude. Generations of Filipino players had dreamed about competing with the world's elite. Alex Eala proved that dream was possible, and history rewarded her immediately. Following her remarkable Wimbledon campaign, she climbed to world number 28 in the WTA rankings, the highest ranking ever achieved by a Filipino tennis player. That number represented much more than personal success. Rankings rise, rankings fall, records are eventually broken. But being the first person from your country to reach a milestone changes how future generations see what is possible. Young Filipino athletes watching Wimbledon were no longer imagining an impossible dream. They were looking at proof. Proof that someone carrying the Philippine flag could compete and win against the very best players in the world. That is precisely why President Marcos Jr. chose his words so carefully during the ceremony. While many people focused on Alex Eala's victories, the president highlighted something even more meaningful. He thanked her for proudly representing the Philippines every time she stepped in front of international media. That detail may sound simple. In reality, it meant everything. Elite athletes often become ambassadors without holding any official title. Every interview, every press conference, every television appearance, every celebration after a victory. Millions of viewers are not only watching the athlete, they're learning something about the country the athlete represents. Again and again, Alex Eala made sure the world knew exactly where she came from. She never distanced herself from her roots. She never treated the Philippine flag as a secondary detail. Instead, she embraced it. That consistency became part of her identity. President Marcos Jr. recognized that those moments carried enormous value for the country. Every time Alex Eala proudly introduced herself as Filipino, she elevated the nation's visibility on one of the world's biggest sporting stages. That is influence that cannot be measured by statistics alone. There was another reason this recognition resonated so deeply. Long before the crowds at Wimbledon applauded her victories, Alex Eala and her family had already accepted enormous sacrifices. At just 14 years old, she left home to continue her development at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. Imagine what that means. leaving family, leaving friends, leaving the comfort of home, moving thousands of miles away as a teenager to chase a dream that offered no guarantees. Many talented young athletes take that journey. Very few ever reach the destination they imagined. For years, Alex Eala trained, competed, learned, struggled, improved, and continued believing that one day she could belong among the world's best. Her parents believed with her. They supported her through victories and disappointments, through injuries, through long seasons, through countless moments when success still felt very far away. That is why the Presidential Citation represented something much deeper than recognition for 2 remarkable weeks at Wimbledon. It acknowledged an entire decade of commitment, a decade of sacrifice, a decade of perseverance that finally reached its defining breakthrough. The country's biggest news organizations understood exactly what that breakthrough represented. Publications such as the Philippine Daily Inquirer and Rappler described the ceremony as a fitting tribute to a sporting figure whose legacy was only beginning to take shape. Television networks, including ABS, CBN, and GMA, repeatedly broadcast the emotional scenes from Malacañang Palace, allowing millions of Filipinos to witness the historic evening. Sports commentators pointed out something equally remarkable. For decades, national sporting icons in the Philippines had largely come from disciplines with deep traditions and enormous public followings. Now, a tennis player had entered that conversation, not because anyone declared her equal to the country's greatest champions overnight, but because she embodied the same qualities Filipinos have always admired: discipline, humility, resilience, grace under pressure, and an unwavering pride in representing the nation. Perhaps that is why the ceremony resonated so powerfully across generations. Older Filipinos saw the reward for years of sacrifice. Young athletes saw a path they had never believed possible. Parents saw proof that extraordinary dreams could begin inside ordinary families. And children saw someone who looked like them standing inside the presidential palace because of talent, determination, and relentless hard work. That is when an athlete becomes something bigger than sports. Alex Eala was no longer simply celebrating a historic Wimbledon. She had become a source of national confidence, a symbol of possibility, and just 2 days later, the Philippines would find another remarkable way to show exactly how much that symbol now meant to the entire country. If there was any doubt that Alex Eala had become one of the Philippines' biggest sporting stars, it disappeared just 2 days later. On July 15th, thousands of fans gathered at the Glorieta Activity Center in Makati for an event called Home Court, the Alex Eala Fan Meet Experience. Alex Eala had traveled from tournament to tournament, competing on courts thousands of miles away from home. She had played in Spain, across Europe, in North America, and on the world's biggest tennis stages. Now, for the first time since her historic Wimbledon breakthrough, the Philippines was giving her something she had rarely experienced during her professional journey: a true home court. The event, organized by Globe Telecom, one of her major sponsors, was never intended to be another formal ceremony. It was designed as a celebration shared directly with the people. Families arrived early. Young tennis players carried rackets and homemade signs. Parents brought their children hoping they could catch even a brief glimpse of the athlete who had suddenly made tennis one of the country's most talked-about sports. Many of those fans had followed every point of her Wimbledon run from thousands of miles away. Now they finally had the chance to cheer for her in person. That atmosphere revealed something important. Success creates fans. Hope creates movements. Alex Eala had become more than a successful athlete. She had become someone people wanted their children to admire. That may be the greatest achievement any professional athlete can earn. Because trophies eventually collect dust, records are eventually broken, rankings inevitably change. But inspiring an entire generation can influence a country for decades. That is exactly why events like this matter. The Philippine government had recognized Alex Eala with one of the nation's highest honors. Now the public was responding with something equally meaningful: their time, their admiration, their belief. The celebration at Glorieta wasn't built around statistics or highlight reels. It was built around connection. Fans wanted to thank her. Children wanted photographs with her. Young players wanted to ask questions about training, discipline, and chasing impossible dreams. Parents wanted their sons and daughters to see that extraordinary success is built through patience, sacrifice, and consistency, not overnight fame. For Philippine tennis, this represented a remarkable turning point. Every sport reaches defining moments when public interest suddenly expands beyond its traditional audience. Basketball experienced it, boxing experienced it, weightlifting experienced it after Hidilyn Diaz made Olympic history. Now, tennis was beginning its own transformation. Participation often follows inspiration. When children see someone from their own country competing with and defeating the world's best players, the impossible suddenly becomes realistic. More children ask for tennis lessons. More families visit local courts. More schools begin paying attention to the sport. More sponsors become willing to invest. That is how one athlete can quietly change the future of an entire sporting community. Alex Eala may never have intended to carry that responsibility, but history rarely asks for permission before placing extraordinary expectations on extraordinary people. The Presidential Citation recognized what she had already accomplished. The Presidential Citation, overwhelming public response, showed what people now expected from her future. She was no longer simply playing for ranking points or tournament trophies. Whether she wanted it or not, millions of young Filipinos would now watch every match believing that anything was possible. That kind of expectation can become pressure, but it can also become purpose. The encouraging reality is that Alex Eala has never appeared motivated solely by records or headlines. Throughout her rise, she has consistently spoken about improving one match at a time, learning from every experience, and representing the Philippines with pride wherever tennis takes her. That mindset may become her greatest advantage, because careers are rarely defined by one unforgettable tournament. They are defined by the ability to continue growing after the spotlight becomes brighter. There will be difficult matches ahead. There will be disappointing losses. There will be seasons when expectations feel almost impossible to satisfy. That is the reality every elite athlete eventually faces. But regardless of what happens next, one fact can no longer be changed. The summer of 2026 permanently altered the story of Philippine tennis. A remarkable Wimbledon campaign introduced Alex Eala to millions of new fans around the world. A presidential citation transformed that sporting success into national recognition. And the thousands of supporters who welcomed her home proved that the connection between Alex Eala and the Filipino people had become something much deeper than victories and rankings. One tournament elevated her career. One ceremony elevated her legacy. One nation embraced her as one of its newest sporting icons. Years from now, people will remember the upset over Iga Swiatek. They will remember the historic run to the second week of Wimbledon. They will remember the climb to world number 28. But perhaps the image that endures the longest will not come from center court. It will come from inside Malacañang Palace, a young woman standing beside the President of the Philippines, a presidential citation in her hands, the Philippine flag behind her, and a country united in celebrating not just what Alex Eala had achieved, but what she had come to represent. Because Wimbledon gave Alex Eala a place in tennis history, the Philippines gave her something even greater, a permanent place in the heart of a nation.